Let's talk about the ACNA's 2019 Book of Common Prayer, and specifically using it as a training wheels prayer book. Hello everyone. Today I hope to begin a short series of videos surrounding the 2019 Anglican Church in North America Book of Common Prayer, which we see here in the Pew edition, and a little more about this edition in a moment. But I want to specifically focus on the use of this prayer book as a beginner's prayer book, a prayer book with training wheels, as it were. I have mentioned many times on this channel that I am not an Anglican. I'm not a member of the ACNA or any other Anglican body. In fact, I'm a member of the Church of the Nazarene, which marks its descent from Anglicanism via Methodism. But I am not from a tradition that uses the Book of Common Prayer or any other structured liturgy for worship. But it has always been fascinating to me, and I have been using it personally for some years for my own personal devotions, Bible study, and prayer. And recently, within the past year, I had an opportunity at my church to lead a small group in the discussion of the Book of Common Prayer. And it was really my first time trying this sort of thing with a group, with some mixed results, I would say. But I think the primary hurdle that I did not overcome, I attempted to make members, or to help members of this group, learn to love the Book of Common Prayer without having them hold a Book of Common Prayer in their hands and use a common prayer book. Because the use of it, lex orandi, lex credendi, the way of worship, the way that we worship informs our belief. Well, learning to love it has to start with learning to use it, and I don't think I did a very good job of that. So the ACNA just recently, in sort of a fire sale to get rid of some older Pew prayer books, which this printing had some somewhat unfortunate problems with the binding that would, under heavy use, begin to come apart, having to do, I think, with the thinness of the liner here. But they had a back stock of these that they were getting rid of at fire sale prices. I think they originally started getting rid of these at $10 a pop, and it went down to $1 for this hardcover prayer book. So I ordered several. Of course, I had to pay for shipping, but really, even after shipping was added in, and these are heavy books, it was still a tremendously good deal. And I thought, if I ever lead such a group again, this might be a good choice to use as a beginner's prayer book. This might teach members of that group to love the prayer book. Now, this is not the prayer book that I love the most. It's a personal preference, of course, but the language of the 1662 or even the 1928 is preferable to my ears, and that is what I have fallen in love with. But it is not to the taste of everyone, and it is, if the language of it becomes another obstacle to its use, I'm okay with a revision of that language if it keeps the spirit of the prayer book. So that was a long introduction to say, I thought this prayer book might be a nice introduction for those for whom the language of the 1662 or 1928 American prayer book would be too high an obstacle for them to get beyond in order to appreciate the prayer book. So this video today, I want to specifically focus on that which is the heart of the prayer book, as they say, usually literally and metaphorically, and that's the Psalter. Now, the Anglican House Press, I think, or perhaps Crossway, but I thought it was Anglican House, did produce a single volume Psalter based on the Psalter they're using here in this prayer book. So I'm not going to be talking about that because I don't happen to own one. And there's a terrific video by Scott over at Thrift Store Bibles that you can watch if you are interested in that aspect of it, that single volume. I think it's leather covered, well printed. I don't remember if that's Crossway or Anglican House. I'll have to put that on screen if I can find that information. But so at the heart of Anglican liturgical worship is the Psalms of David, the Psalter. And we're going to look at that as a first way of considering this prayer book as a safe and useful alternative as an introductory training wheels prayer book. So here we have not exactly the center, but when you take the Psalter as a whole, it forms roughly the center of the prayer book as it should be. And the ACNA's 2019 prayer book does have it broken up into a 30-day reading cycle, as is standard practice in the Book of Common Prayer. So we're going to look at this Psalter just briefly. I know I'm making this way longer than it has to be. That's my nature. But I'm going to be kind of using the green prayer book brigade here as comparisons. So we have another book from the ACNA. This is the traditional language edition, the same liturgy that's in the Training Wheels prayer book here of the ACNA, the 2019. They have restored it to kind of the Elizabethan English that is familiar to users of the 1662 or 1928 American prayer book, among others. So we'll be looking at the Psalter, which is the 1928 American revision of the Coverdale Psalter, which the Coverdale is the traditional Psalter of prayer book worship. We'll also be looking at the 1979 American Episcopal Book of Common Prayer and its Psalter, which was the, immediate forebear to the 2019 ACNA prayer book, because the ACNA was, to a certain extent, a reaction against developments in the Episcopal Church, and including the 1979 Book of Common Prayer and its significant departures from the prayer book tradition. But that's kind of a subject for another day. But we will be looking at the Psalter included in this 1979 Episcopal book. And of course, the gold standard. We'll probably reference also the 1662. This is the international edition, so this will not be exactly the text of the original 1662, but very close, with a few very minor changes that have been well covered, documented in previous videos. So just things we'll be using as reference, and I need to get on with this. Let's first look right at Psalm 1, because that's a psalm that is familiar to a lot of people. It's the very beginning of the Psalter, the first one you read on at morning prayer on day 1 of the month, which is not today, but we'll pretend it is for the sake of this video. We see at the top morning prayer, Psalm 1, day 1, and the psalm reads thus: "Blessed is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stood in the way of sinners, and has not sat in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law will he meditate day and night, and he shall be like a tree planted by the waterside, that will bring forth his fruit in due season. His leaf also shall not wither, and look, whatever he does, it shall prosper. As for the ungodly, it is not so with them, but they are like the chaff, which the wind scatters away from the face of the earth. Therefore the ungodly shall not be able to stand in the judgment, neither the sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. So I think right off the bat you can see the language continues to be elevated. The cadence and the word choices, the translator choices here are similar to what one would expect in a prayer book psalter if one was familiar with the previous iterations of the Coverdale Psalter. By the way, I didn't say the Psalter used here, they're calling the new Coverdale Psalter. So the Coverdale Psalter, which was included in the very first prayer book of 1549 and in subsequent prayer books, continued nearly unchanged for centuries. Even after the King James, the authorized version of Scripture was used for all other parts of, or most other parts of liturgical worship in the Church of England. The Coverdale Psalter was so well loved that it continued to be used in prayer books, even when the authorized version had taken over in most other areas of liturgical worship. Okay, back to this psalm. So the language is still elevated. It still sounds like Scripture. It has that difficult to name property of sounding exalted, elevated, reverent. By way of comparison, this prayer book's immediate predecessor, the 1979 Book of Common Prayer. And one thing you'll notice right off the bat in Psalm 1, which, by the way, as an aside, is closer to the end of the 1979 prayer book. Don't know if that's intentional or not. Don't mean to be flippant. But this revision of the Psalter was in part affected by the attempts, noble attempts, to render a more inclusive and gender-appropriate language. But you see it right from the start, and they're having to change the pronouns in such a way that it becomes plural rather than singular. So you maybe lose, you could argue, some of the Christological parallels. But anyway, all that aside, just listen to the Psalm 1 as it is here in the 1979 Episcopal Prayer Book. Happy are they who have not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor lingered in the way of sinners, nor sat in the seats of the scornful. Their delight is in the law of the Lord, and they meditate on his law day and night. They are like trees planted by streams of water, bearing fruit in due season, with leaves that do not wither. Everything they do shall prosper. It is not so with the wicked. They are like chaff which the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked shall not stand upright when judgment comes, nor the sinner in the counsel of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked is doomed. I would argue still has some of that elevated feel to it, but there are some definite differences. It feels maybe slightly more conversational, but the change in the number of the pronoun there stands out, certainly. Blessed is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the ungodly. Happy are they who have not walked in the counsel of the wicked. So significant difference there in Psalm 1. While if we go to the 1928, which was the predecessor of the 1979 Episcopal Prayer Book, the 1928 Prayer Book, as it's printed here in the ACNA's Traditional Language Edition, we read it as, Blessed is the man that hath not walked in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stood in the way of sinners, and hath not sat in the seat of the scornful, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. And in his law will he exercise himself day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the waterside, that will bring forth his fruit in due season. His leaf also shall not wither, and look, whatsoever he doeth, it shall prosper. As for the ungodly, it is not so with them, but they are like the chaff, which the wind scattereth away from the face of the earth. Therefore the ungodly shall not be able to stand in the judgment, neither the sinners in the congregation of the righteous. But the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, and the way of the ungodly shall perish. You can tell the revisers, the translators of the new Coverdale Psalter, were very much intending to follow as close as possible previous iterations prior to 1979 in the choice of translation, the word that they're choosing, keeping a very similar cadence. So the surgery is minor. The excisions or changes are few and understandable. Blessed is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the ungodly, versus blessed is the man that hath not walked in the counsel of the ungodly. So they're changing hath to has, for instance. In verse 4, his leaf also shall not wither, and look, whatsoever he doeth. His leaf also shall not wither, and look, whatever he doeth. So whatsoever has changed to whatever. So a gentle revision of the 1928 Psalter. Part of the lore of this new Psalter, new Coverdale Psalter, is that they were using as a reference not only prayer books that had gone before the, of course they would have been using the 1662 as well as the 1928, and they do say in their introduction, they reference the 1979, the more modern language, as a reference, because that's part of their liturgical history as well. But they were also working from an aborted attempt from the early 60s to produce a new Psalter, and that was a panel that included C.S. Lewis and T.S. Eliot, as you may have heard. So they were using some of the work of that panel that never produced a Psalter that was embraced by the Church of England, but they used some of their work. I'm going to let's look at a psalm that comes up frequently in morning and evening prayer, because that's primarily what I use my prayer books for. We're going to look at Psalm 100, the Jubilate Deo, and we'll look at it again first here in the New Coverdale. That's in the ACNA's prayer book. O be joyful in the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness, and come before his presence with a song. Be assured that the Lord, he is God. It is he that has made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture. O go your way into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him, and speak good of his name. For the Lord is gracious, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures from generation to generation. And that is so close to what I'm used to saying at morning and evening prayer, in the daily office, that is, in the 1662 and 1928 prayer books. It is so close that it throws me off when I reach a word that's been slightly changed, and the changes are very slight. Sorry, I can't speak and count psalms at the same time. I even put a book dart there so I could find it easily, but you see how well that helped me. So from the 1662 International Edition prayer book, O be joyful in the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness, and come before his presence with a song. Be ye sure that the Lord, he is God. It is he that hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture. O go your way into his gates with thanksgiving, and into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him, and speak good of his name. For the Lord is gracious, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth from generation to generation. So again, the surgery is minor. His truth endures from generation to generation, rather than endureth. Be joyful in the Lord, all you lands, rather than ye lands. And any other changes, I don't recall. A very gentle revision indeed. So, not wanting to make this any longer than it needs to be, again, just looking at the Psalter, which is, again, the heart of prayer book worship, the heart of Anglican worship, the Psalter, which you read through, if you're following the prayer book, once every 30 days, and Psalms are included even apart from that in the daily office, morning and evening prayer. The Psalter is the beating heart of the prayer book, and I at first had my reservations about a new Coverdale Psalter, because why would such a thing be needed? The Coverdale Psalter is as near perfect as one can get, in my opinion, and the opinion of people for centuries. But I can give my endorsement to this if the minor changes that they've made makes it that much easier for a new user of the prayer book. If it removes an obstacle that would otherwise be insurmountable or would deter some from enjoying the prayer book, I can certainly live with that. And they have shown tremendous respect to earlier versions of the Psalter in their translation choices, and keeping the poetic quality, the exalted language, the reverent feel. It gets a thumbs up from me, and this would not cause me to not recommend this book. How's that for a couple of negatives in a row? The point I'm making is, where this might have been a sticking point for me because I love the Coverdale Psalter and have become very familiar with it from years of reading it, this is close enough. It's awfully close and doesn't bring it down. It's not debasing the language in the least bit. So passes the first hurdle. The ACNA 2019 prayer book, the Psalter, is a thing of beauty, paying respect to previous iterations. I give it a thumbs up. So the next video in this particular series may not be chronologically the next in my channel, and almost certainly will not be. Apologies once again for all the traffic noises. It's the fall. I have the window open. The next video in this series will be looking at morning prayer and see whether changes made in this prayer book are too problematic for me to recommend its usage. It's a prayer book. I've had versions of this ACNA prayer book for some time now. I'm only just now getting around to reviewing it, so we'll look at that in the next video. I appreciate you watching to this point, even though this was way longer than it needed to be. Thanks all of you, and I hope to see you here again next time.